Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a Week 4 Bleacher Report show. I am Mark Dankenbring, your host today, joined by Michael Leone. We are both here from Establish the Run. We've got Leone, Director of Analytics at ETR. I'm the projections lead there. So we've got the data nerds here with you today ahead of Week 4 to talk some fades that we are approaching ahead of these Week 4 contests. Leone, how you doing on this fine Thursday?
Doing pretty good. Excited to talk some fades. Fades are always a difficult subject because you're trying to find guys that you might start and you're considering starting but aren't in the best spots. We don't want to just give, the obvious sits here.
Absolutely. I think we're both optimists, Leone, you could say. So it is a little bit tough for us to talk disparagingly about players, but we have a list of six for you all here today, and hopefully this will be an interactive show as well. So if you guys have any questions for us, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be taking chat questions here periodically. But Leone, let's start with the Thursday night football game here and one of our six fades of the week, and that is going to be Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. Why don't you talk to me about the outlook here for Walker going up against the Cardinals here in week 4?
Yeah, I think people might be excited to play Walker off after, back-to-back pretty big fantasy games. He had 100 and a touchdown against Pittsburgh. Then last week with Zach Charbonnet out, he gets loaded up with 16 carries. Wasn't super efficient, but found the box twice. But we do expect Charbonnet back this week. And uh, this split there has been much more 50-50 than I would have liked as a big Kenneth Walker fan. You combine that kind of a difficult matchup against Arizona, low total game, and the fact that Walker, in two of the three games, he only has one target. In two of the three games, he was dreadful from an efficiency standpoint. 2.4 yards per carry against New Orleans, 2 yards per carry against San Francisco. Did have the great game against Pittsburgh, but you shape all that up, and the floor here is actually pretty low, despite what you've gotten from him from a fantasy perspective the past 2 weeks. So there's definitely other options out there that you may want to start over Walker.
I know this is a tough one for you, especially as a big Kenneth Walker stan over the years. We haven't seen the explosiveness really come to fruition yet too much this season. As you mentioned, Zach Charbonnet has gotten the majority of the carries in the two games that he's been healthy alongside Kenneth Walker here. Seems like he is going to suit up tonight despite being listed questionable. And then I think a great point there too on how limited the targets have been for the Seattle running backs as well. They are a sub 10% target share to the running backs on the season, third lowest in the NFL, which is a bit of a surprise there, but new offensive coordinator in Seattle, maybe that is a bit sticky. All right, let's head to another running back that we are fading here in week 4, and it's another one with a tough spot on the road here, and that's Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. Mike, another spot where the running back target share has been really low. The Titans actually come in lowest in the NFL as Cam Ward has been looking to push the ball down the field early on in his first three career starts. What's the outlook look like for Tony Pollard this week for you, Leone?
Yeah, with Pollard, expect him to get loaded up with a high percentage of his team's rushes again, but that just hasn't netted out in much efficiency. He doesn't have 100 yards in a single game yet. He did find the box last week and he had 4 targets, which might have people feeling optimistic. But as you mentioned, overall, the target share hasn't been there. Only one target each of the first 2 games. This matchup against Houston has the Titans with the lowest team total on the slate. And at the running back position, if we're not churning out, high yards per carry, we're not having a high likelihood of finding the end zone, and we're not racking up catches, things can get really, really ugly with these trap backs. And I know, Dank, you've been eyeing up some of the offensive line injuries for the Titans, which certainly don't help matters.
Yeah, it looks like the Titans will be without right tackle J.C. Latham again this week. And we were expecting under Brian Callahan and his dad, Bill Callahan, to really get this offensive line going so far this year. Hasn't really worked out so far. Cam Ward, one of the highest sack rates in the NFL so far. A bit on the quarterback there as a rookie, but also, I believe, on the offensive line. Again, they'll be without looks like they're starting right tackle going up against this Texans D line that is just absolutely ferocious down there. And Titans, 7.5 point home underdogs. You mentioned the week low team total there for the Titans, and Tony Pollard, since he's not being involved in the pass game right now, we're really relying on rushing yards and touchdowns from him to hit his ceiling. And it seems hard to imagine that happening this week for Tony Pollard. Although I hope he does because I have Pollard in quite a lot of spots this year. So hoping he can come through, but certainly not the best setup there for Tony P on the road. All right, Mike, we've got a couple players down. Let's look to the chat room here and see if we got any questions from the fine listeners here at Bleacher Report. you can go ahead and grab that Surface Pro. I think we'll have a little interactive chat here. So if you're ready, feel free to fire off any questions we got going there, Leone.
Yeah, Brycer415 asks, fade Brees Hall or Alvin Kamara this week? I think you want to play Brees Hall here. I know he hasn't run great the last 2 weeks, but I'm still more excited about the efficiency upside potential for him against this Miami defense that's really struggled opposed to Kamara. The other team with an extremely low team total this week, in addition to the Titans, is the Saints. And we haven't seen the same target share dank out of Kamara as we have in the past. We also get Jay Green 131 saying Kyler or Dart in Superflex. Got to make that decision today. What say you, Dank?
Oh, that's a tough one because I'm interested to see how much Jackson Dart runs in his first start. I do think it's a tough matchup for both. Really love the Seahawks defense under Mike McDonald. Also love the Chargers defense there under Jesse Minter. I think I would lean Kyler just at home here. On a short week, better team total as well for Kyler, and just more faith that he can run around a little bit more too. I definitely like the prospects of Dart kind of throughout the whole season because I do think he'll be active on the ground. But I think this week, I want to give Dart one start under his belt before I plug him in there in fantasy. So I'm going to stick with Kyler in that one.
And we get one final quarterback question here from Eric Oliver. Purdy for Dak. I'm not sure if this is a trade or a start sit. If it's a start sit, we're going to talk about Dak. He actually makes our list here. Spoiler alert. So I would start Purdy over Dak this week. Uh, Over the course of the season, though, Dank, do you have a take here? I know you've been working hard on our rest of the season top 150 ranks over at ETR.
Yeah, I like Purdy there both this weekend and rest of the season. Obviously, Dak Prescott losing CeeDee Lamb here for a few weeks. They also have a couple offensive line injuries that they're dealing with in Dallas that we'll hit on here in a little bit as well. Nice little tease. I think Dak might reappear down the line in this show. And yeah, with Purdy, it seems like Jawan Jennings could be back on the field. They also will get back Demarcus Robinson from suspension. He missed the first 3 games, and not that Demarcus Robinson is a huge factor in the passing game, but at least gives them another NFL competent wide receiver to add to the group there. All right, Leone, let's get back into our fades of the week and another tough one for you to talk about here as the King Buffalo Bills laundry bro. We've got Dalton Kincaid next up on the fades list, and the Bills. We've talked about multiple teams here with low team totals, but the Bills actually have the highest team total on the week here at home against the Saints. So curious your thoughts on the Dalton Kincaid fade in week 4.
Yeah, I gotta tell Levitan, I put Walker and Kincaid on this list here, so you can't call me a full out homer here for my guys. Is trying to be objective here, and the issue with Kincaid, Kincaid's off to a great start to this season. I believe he leads all tight ends in the NFL in yards per route run, so I still think there's a really nice upside case for him rest of the season. But we are seeing some of the same issues we saw last year, which is his route share is just capped. He's run about 55, 56% of the routes very consistently weeks 1 through 3. They're playing multiple tight ends. They'll play Knox in the red zone. And that makes me a little bit concerned to start him in these matchups where the Bills are such huge favorites and their rush rate's going to be so high that if you don't have a high route share and the total team pass volume is not there, the floor is going to be pretty low in terms of the opportunities that Kincaid sees for Buffalo this week.
Yeah, you almost hope that Dalton Kincaid kind of gets all of his production in the first half here. It's hard to imagine the Bills are going to have to throw or push the ball down the field much in the second half as they are 16.5 point favorites over the Saints. Easily the biggest spread we've seen so far this year. It might be up there for biggest spreads we get all season there with the Bills hosting the Saints. And we saw in week 1 that the Bills wide receiver rotation and targetry kind of condensed quite a bit, which we were excited about after things were really spread out last season. But then the last few weeks, since that week 1 game against Baltimore, where they were playing from behind, we've seen things under Joe Brady kind of spread out a bit more. They've established the run quite a bit. James Cook is looking great. So Kincaid, I think a bit of a thinner play this week, despite the really strong team total there for Buffalo. All right, let's head in division down there to South Florida, Mike, where we get Jalen Waddle at home against the Jets. We saw Waddle kind of suck out a little bit last week, scoring a touchdown on a short yardage play there, but the target share hasn't quite been there early on with Devon Achane being featured as well as Tyreek Hill. So what are your thoughts here on Waddle at home against the Jets?
This again, we're kind of fading these players that have sucked out a little bit finding the end zone the last couple of weeks, which Waddle has. As you mentioned, target's not quite as strong as we would hope. The downfield threat that he's been in the past, we haven't seen that type of efficiency from him this year. The yards per target's okay, but that's due to like a really high catch rate, not due to big splash plays that we're used to seeing from Jalen Waddle. And now he's facing a Jets team that in our defense versus position metric over at ETR, which isn't just purely descriptive in terms of telling you what's happened in the past. It's trying to be forward looking and adjusting for the quality of opponents. We have the Jets as the second toughest matchup in the NFL for wide receivers from a fantasy point perspective. So really don't like the matchup. Tua has struggled. The O-line there has struggled. And Waddle already matching last year's touchdown total. I don't think he's going to keep finding the end zone. So it could be tough sledding for him having a meaningful day. Dink, we've got Xavier Worthy coming back from injury, Devontae Smith, George Pickens, guys like Quentin Johnston, the rookie Tedoroy McMillan, a slew of guys we actually have projected a bit higher this week.
No doubt. And this could be a game where the play volume isn't exactly where we want for fantasy purposes. We know the Jets on the other side want to run the ball as much as possible. And so far, this Dolphins defense really hasn't been able to stop much at all. So I think we could get a case where the Jets are able to establish it quite a bit with Breece Hall. Maybe we get Justin Fields back in there to add a little bit more of a rushing element too over Tyrod Taylor. So could be. Waddle's another guy I have in a decent amount of season-long leagues as well. So I'm hoping for a good game here, but certainly the matchup as you laid out there, not necessarily ideal for Mr. Waddle. All right, Leone, let's grab that surface once again here and go through some chat questions as we're through a couple more players here. Appreciate all you guys tuning in with us today and leaving your comments in chat for us to go through. Whenever you're ready, Mike, feel free to shout out the next question for us.
Yeah, Tevin Horton 2 asks Benson or Judkins. It's a really good question. Judkins has stepped into a workhorse role for Cleveland much faster than we expected. But think Benson's someone we've been eyeing since the first week as someone to stash on rosters because he took over that third down role for Arizona. They weren't playing DeMarcado at all. He was cutting into James Conner's workload a little bit. So with Conner out, it really seems like the team trusts him. I know it's not a great matchup tonight, but I think that full workload for Benson's more valuable than Judkins will get.
I'd lean Benson
GP,
there as well. Yep.
GP Bowler says CD and Evans both injured. Should I start Quentin Johnston or DK? Trey Tucker also have Cup. So Dink, how would you rank those receivers as far as starts this week?
Yeah, I think Quentin Johnston is my favorite of that group. We've seen the Chargers remain really aggressive with their pass rate early on. They actually lead the NFL in pass rate over expectation. And going up against this Giants defense, they do have a strong front, but the secondary leaves a lot to be desired. So I definitely love betting on Justin Herbert there and the continued connection with Quentin Johnston. To start his career, he was mainly just a big play threat. And if he didn't score a touchdown, then he'd leave us fantasy managers, wanting more. But the volume has really come up towards the second half of last season and has continued so far this season as well. So I think Quentin Johnston should be a fixture in fantasy starting lineups moving forward.
J Heath 16 says Swift or Pollard question mark Swift hurt. I think as long as Swift's out there, that's who you have to start here. We have Pollard on our fade list for a reason. Dink, we also get DeAndre Swift on the by Leone model over at Established to Run. That's kind of a model that looks at the past opportunities, the past few weeks for running backs and decides if they've underperformed that. And if so, guys get on this list as sort of buy low candidates, if you will. So do like Swift if he's out there. Another running back start question from Vangvo71, Breece Hall or J.K. Dobbins?
I think, man, that's really tough because J.K. Dobbins has one of the best matchups in the NFL this week at home against the Bengals. We also saw the Broncos kind of remove Tyler Bidet from their running back rotation last week and just give all the opportunities to Dobbins and rookie RJ Harvey there. I think that's Dobbins for me at home against a Bengals defense that we saw just absolutely ceded massive yardage to Jordan Mason last week. So I do like Breece, but I think just given the matchup, I'd lean Dobbins there.
And final question for now, A Force 23, Fade Alave question mark. I've got my Bills Circle the Wagons t-shirt on, so I don't know if I'm the most objective source here. But Olave also on the Baglioni model for the pass catchers. And we can never bank on Spencer Rattler feeding his wide receivers in an efficient manner, but from a volume perspective, Kellen Moore's trying to find ways to get the ball to Chris Olave. The targets are there. I think one of these weeks he's just going to run a little bit luckier in terms of the yards per target and maybe finding the end zone. So even in a difficult spot, I think Olave's a pretty good start this week.
I would agree with that, especially in a full PPR league. The volume has been so outstanding for Chris Olave. I think it's really hard to sit him in those formats. If you're in a half PPR or standard, I could potentially get behind it just with, the amount of touchdowns that we're expecting the Saints to score isn't that high. And Olave typically, or I guess throughout his career, hasn't been the best touchdown scorer himself. So I think certainly much more valuable in PPR settings. All right, Mike, let's get back into it here and finish off our fades list ahead of week 4. We have the teas coming up here, Leone, and Dak Prescott is the next name up on our list at home here this week against a Green Bay Packers defense that sees Micah Parsons come back to Dallas. They have been certainly a ferocious defense to deal with so far. What's your read on Dak Prescott's matchup and outlook for week 4?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit bleak for Dak. We have the Green Bay Packers defense with Micah Parsons, as you mentioned, uh, depressing opposing quarterback fantasy points at the highest rate in the league. We have it as the most difficult fantasy matchup for an opposing quarterback, and I think that makes sense. And Dak's on here because we've been excited to start him the last 2 weeks in better matchups against the Giants and against the Bears in a game that was, kind of supposed to be a shootout, but CeeDee Lamb goes down there. So not only are you facing this really difficult matchup, you're facing it without your top wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb, who's been there, year in and year out for Dak Prescott. So I'm really worried about both the floor and the ceiling for Prescott in this spot. And our early projection for him is quite low. We only have him for about 15 and a half fantasy points this week, which puts him behind the Matt Staffords, Daniel Jones, Jared Goffs of the world, which in most one quarterback leagues, you should have the ability to be starting someone in that tier to give you a bit more upside than Dak.
Totally makes sense that Dak's projection wouldn't be strong this week as primarily pocket passer going up against a strong Packers defense without CeeDee Lamb as well. And then they're also down a couple starting offensive linemen. Center Cooper Beebe was placed on IR last week, and then they lost starting guard Tyler Booker last week. He could potentially end up on IR as well, but we know they're both officially out for this week and going up against a Packers pass rush that just gave up, a pretty tough game to the Browns there in Cleveland. Got to think they're going to be coming out hot and rally around Micah Parsons, who is, first revenge game here in Dallas. I'm sure the excitement is going to be, close to a 10.0 there in Dallas on the Packers side. I also want to mention Javonte Williams as a player I don't necessarily love this week. We only do a rest season top 150 show on Wednesdays on the Established Run podcast feed you guys can all tune into. But my sell this week was Javonte Williams. I think with the offensive line injuries and tough schedule upcoming here, that I think, Javonte has performed very well in the first few weeks, but I'm expecting, things to crumble a little bit around this Cowboys offense without the starting offensive lineman I mentioned, and then without CeeDee Lamb. It's just hard to imagine them being super efficient over the next few weeks. All right, let's head to our final player on the fade list. We are going back to this Thursday night football game, Leone, and coming off a really tough outing in week 3 is Marvin Harrison Jr. He looks to rebound after a couple brutal drops, one wide open that could have been, I don't know, 50, 60-yard reception, another in the end zone that clanked off of his hand. So you are fading Marvin Harrison Jr. this week, Leone. Tell the people why.
Yeah, I know people are excited to kind of draft him this year as a bounce back candidate. I know I took him in the fourth round of a couple leagues, somewhat reluctantly, but I was hoping it was there. And we've seen more of what we saw last year from Harrison. We continue to see Trey McBride dominating the targets for this Arizona team. He's at a 27% target share. There's no other Cardinal pass catcher above 20%. Harrison's at 19%. That'd be okay in a pass heavier offense or one that's feeding him more, consistently catchable balls. He only caught 53% of his targets last season through 3 games, small sample, but he's under 60% again. So I do think we've seen, the potential for big plays. They haven't quite capitalized, and I hope that happens in the future. But I don't know if this is the spot to fire him up in a lower total. We have the Seattle defense limiting target share to the wide receiver position at one of the highest rates to the league as they kind of funnel stuff underneath to the running back spot a little bit more. So I just don't think you're going to come out of this game tonight really regretting in a strong way benching Marvin Harrison.
It's been a tough sophomore campaign after an even tougher rookie campaign. We saw him catch a touchdown in week one against the Saints, which was a nice way to start the year. But yeah, last couple weeks have been disappointing. I'm in a dynasty league with a few friends of mine who are actually from Arizona. And last week I have a Kyler and Marvin Harrison Jr. stack in that league, and I ended up losing by about 6 points. And if either of those catches could have been hauled in by Marvin Harrison Jr., it would have been a different outcome. So I'm certainly salty. This week I moved him to the bench, and it is a really tough matchup here against the Seahawks. Again, this defense under Mike McDonald has performed really well in his first 2 seasons there. They also get cornerback Devin Witherspoon back this week from a knee injury that caused him to miss week 3. So Seattle's defense should mostly be at full health here, and yeah, Trey McBride remains, the focal point of that offense. Maybe the James Conner injury could open up some more opportunities for the pass game and Marvin Harrison Jr., but that remains to be seen. And at this point, Leone, we can, it's just all wish casting for
Yeah.
MHJ. We want an easier role, we want easier catches and higher target share from him, but it just hasn't happened. And comments from him and the coaching staff are, it doesn't seem like, they're really going to try and make him the focal point at this point in time. All right, let's head back to chat here for a few more questions. We definitely got some time to get through some more questions here. So if you guys have any, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll do our best to point you in the right direction here, Leone. Take us away with any more questions from the chat.
Yeah, Sean Zimmerman asks Scadaboo or Javante. So shout out Sean, who drafted pretty well to get 2 late round running backs that are both contributing right now. I don't love the spots for either back this week, but the roles for both of them are really strong. I'm gonna go with Javante here. Just a little bit concerned about the rookie quarterback and what that does for the Giants in a negative game script against the Chargers. But Dink, I'm curious your thoughts because I know you're worried about Javante in this tough matchup against Green Bay as well.
I think the setups are pretty similar here. I did mention Javante as a fade earlier, so it is kind of hard for me to lean that way. But I think with Scadaboo, the one big thing I'm watching this week is if Jackson Dart will check down to him as much as Russell Wilson did. Russ was kind of either check down or throw the go ball, and I really wonder if Jackson Dart will continue that method or if they really switch up this whole offensive philosophy under him. So the Javante role, we know it's really strong, and while the matchup may not be great, I think I kind of lean him at home, but that's certainly a close one and a toss up in my opinion.
Just John 78 says Quentin Johnston or Jordan Mason in flex. Another person who drafted quite well to have those options. Hit on Quentin Johnston earlier. This Chargers team, highest pass rate over expectation in the league, highest concentration of targets to the wide receiver position, and they're just playing 3 guys. So I really like both Johnston and Mason as long as we continue to have Aaron Jones out. I'm going to go with the back, though, and Jordan Mason, who I think is a little bit safer. This Pittsburgh defense hasn't been as strong as it's been in the past. I know they only gave up 14 last week, Dank, but that easily could have been 28 or more if the Patriots didn't bungle some red zone possessions.
I would agree with that. Like I said, I do like Quentin Johnston a lot, but the workload for Jordan Mason, I mean, he could be looking at 20 plus touches this week. And you mentioned the Steelers defense has been underperforming so far. I always get a little bit worried about like the travel for these teams as they go overseas and how that's going to impact things. But I think in this spot with Jordan Mason, don't overthink it. He should be involved in the pass game as well there as the workhorse running back.
Great Well asks Bo Nix or Daniel Jones. Any thoughts as far as that QB decision goes?
Um, That's a tough one. We just haven't seen much quality play from Bo Nix so far, and Daniel Jones has been quite the opposite. He's been balling out there. So I love the weapons that the Colts have, and I think just a little bit more predictable. That game, I think, should be more of a shootout. I expect the Broncos to play well at home against this Bengals team. So I think both are good options this week. I think you got to ride the Daniel Jones wave, though. What do you think, Leone?
Yeah, I think I'd ride the hot hand here with Daniel Jones. He's playing incredible ball right now. Alexa Ramble 3 asks Ridley or Johnson. A lot of Quentin Johnston questions. I get it. You're not sure if you should trust him or not. I think it's Quentin Johnston here, as crazy as that sounds. Ridley's target share hasn't elevated, quite as much in a concentrated fashion as I'd hoped. And we outlined some concerns about the Titans offense in general earlier when talking about Tony Pollard. Bill 1973 asks Trey Benson or Ashton Genty. This is where we are. Dank and I pre-show were lamenting we took Ashton Genty at the 1-2 turn in our high stakes draft in this offseason instead of Puka Nakua. At the time, we were kind of worried about the Stafford back injury. So Max Payne then for Bill to troll us with this Benson or Genty question. Who you starting, Dank?
Oh man, that is so brutal that we've come to this point here in week four. I think I lean Genty still. We kind of have this movable force against a stoppable object here in the Raiders versus the Bears. The Bears defense has been one of the worst in the NFL, and obviously the Raiders struggles have primarily come from the lack of talent and effectiveness of their offensive line. I think a home game here, really high total in that one for Bears at Raiders. Got to think they try and get Ashton Genty involved more in the pass game as well moving forward. So man, that's a gross question here at week four. Just imagining, the draft capital put into Genty over Benson, but I think I still lean Genty there here for one more week.
NYG forever. Chase Brown or Kyler Williams? I'm assuming he means Kyron Williams. New York Giants forever. Let's assume that's Kyron Williams or Chase Brown. And for me, that's Kyron Williams. Actually, one of the more exciting games on the docket is this Rams Colts game in a dome setting this week, whereas that Bengals offense, honestly, it was kind of brutal, even in the snaps that Joe Burrow had taken this year. Chase Brown yet to crack 100 yards rushing, with Jake Browning still at QB. I'm going with Kyron, even with Blake Corum mixing in a little bit. Do you agree there, Dank, or are you going Chase Brown?
Yeah, I agree on Kyron this week for sure. I think Chase Brown, all things considered, is mostly like a buy low right now in fantasy, just given the sentiment is an all-time low on him right now. But on the road against the Broncos is a really tough spot. So definitely lean Kyron for this week.
Highlight NFL says George Pickens or Jordan Mason at flex. A lot of upside for George Pickens in terms of the potential for that target share to really increase for him with CeeDee Lamb out. But man, the matchup's so difficult that I'm worried about just that offense in general being able to allow fantasy points to be scored. And I would side with Jordan Mason yet again here for another flex question.
Agreed. Yeah, just so much more confidence in the touches that he's going to get. It could be a big game for George Pickens, but I think betting against the Dallas offense this week is mostly where I want to be. So certainly lean Mason.
Indiana 13, last question of the day. Cup or Bateman, thin at wide receiver. Can see that. If it's a full PPR league, I think I'd go Cup the way this Seattle offense operates. Really, I know Torrey Horton's played well, but you're really going to see some concentrated target shares on the top two wide receivers. And as amazing as JSN is, I do think his target share probably has to come down a little bit. It's at unsustainable rate. So I prefer Cup in full PPR short term, but if you're in like a non-PPR league, the bet for a touchdown each week is going to lean towards the Baltimore receiver there in Bateman.
Yeah, I agree. Volume projection on Cup a little bit safer there. So agreed on the kind of the format determining who you start there. I do think the Ravens, going to be desperate on the road here against the Chiefs. Hopefully that game can turn into a shootout that we've seen plenty of times over the years from the Chiefs at the Ravens. Excuse me, Ravens at the Chiefs. So, I think I lean Bateman and half PPR or otherwise, but that'll do it for the questions here today. Leone, let's recap our week four fades list heading into Thursday night football. We've got Kenneth Walker, the third there, number one. Zach Charbonnet coming back from injury. We're expecting a split of reps there on the road in Arizona. Tony Pollard, second on the list here. Again, a tough matchup on the road against the Texans and their ferocious defensive line. Dalton Kincaid at home against the Saints certainly seems like a great matchup, but the routes and the volume haven't quite been there for Kincaid. He's been sun running a little bit on efficiency, so I think that might come down to earth a little bit. Number four, Jalen Waddle at home against the Jets. Again, another tough matchup based on our defense versus position metrics over at Establish Run. If you guys want to check out our full list of DVP rankings, we have those updating every week on site over there. Number 5 is Dak Prescott. Really tough matchup at home against this Packers team coming off a loss. Obviously, Micah Parsons' return to Dallas as well should prevent some problems there for Dak. And then 6 on the list, we return to Thursday Night Football and Marvin Harrison Jr. again, hoping he can kind of bust out of the slump we've got here. But, certainly a tough matchup against the Seahawks and their swarming secondary. Appreciate all you guys tuning in with us today. We've got things going up for week 4 at Establish Run, all your DFS projections if you need them. We got podcasts on the Establish Run podcast. Can feel free to check us out on YouTube as well. Really appreciate Bleacher Report hosting us here every week. Once again, Mike Leone, the co-host here with me today. I'm Mark Dankenbring filling in for Adam Levitan. I'm sure he'll be back in the saddle here next week, but appreciate all you guys tuning in with us this week, and we'll catch you next time. Good luck in week 4.